Hey everyone and welcome to another video guys, and today we're going to be talking about the mid lane meta evolution right from the beginning of season 11 right through to the recent patch 11.18 and where I believe the meta is really shaping up to be. Now the interesting thing is you can actually compare this with my pre-season predictions of the way the meta is going to pan out, and it's eerily accurate. So if you're interested, check out that video about 10 months ago. Quite interesting. And then on the back end of this video, I'm going to be talking about why I believe the mid lane meta doesn't mean jack shit for climbing in solo queue. So bear with me, it'll be quite interesting. So we're going to kick it off with the beginning of the season. Very damage-oriented meta, as we usually see. We see buffs to things like Lichbane, Rockabelle, and obviously these items got introduced, I believe, into the game. So we saw a very burst-oriented meta. Fizz, Victor, all these Lichbane users were absolutely killing it, and these were dominating the meta at the very beginning. I myself was just abusing Victor with that Lichbane. It was unbelievably strong. And then alongside this, basically at the exact same time, we saw people realize how strong the lethality build path was. So Prowlers champions were dominating, obviously. People realized that Cyrilda's was a very good item as well. And these champions, and obviously the entire lethality build path, was ever present throughout the entirety of the season and will continue to be, yes, even though Qiyana did get a little bit of a nerf in 11.18, and that is actually quite impactful. But still, throughout the majority of the season, these three champions were just great in solo queue no matter what. Although their build path did shift around. I know Talon, especially after the Prowlers nerfed, shifted to a Goredrinker setup and things like that. And yes, Qiyana definitely did get a hit after the Prowlers nerfs where you couldn't proc it on minions and stuff like that. But regardless, these champions were ever present. Then we also saw, the nerfs, inevitable nerfs, the Lichbane, Rockabelle, Night Harvester, etc. Nash's was also incredibly strong, so Katarina and Kayle were abusing the very effective Nash's tooth, and that inevitably got nerfed. And then people realized, holy shit, Shieldbow is OP, right? Shieldbow was genuinely OP, their lifesteal was incredible. So Shieldbow abusers came into play. Aurelia, Yone came to the forefront. Inevitably, Shieldbow was nerfed, and then people realized, holy shit, Gale Force is incredibly strong. Now, Gale Force dominated mainly the bot lane, the 80 carry meta and things like that, but Lucian was one of the few champions in mid lane that could really abuse that. And people also realized that Lucian had an incredibly flexible build path. He could build any of their 80 mythics really effectively. People were still trying to experiment what the most effective build path was for Lucian, but he was dominating the meta at the very beginning of the season, mainly due to Gale Force being an incredibly strong item. But again, Lucian has basically been ever present throughout the entirety of season 11 because the champion has so much build path flexibility and obviously works really well with items like Cyrilda's and things like that. So a lot of item flexibility. Now with that, over time, people started to realize that Everfrost was actually a pretty good item alongside Everfrost inevitably getting buffs. So we saw the rise of champions like Kassadin, Ahri, and Nivea. Sylas also came into play, but Sylas was kind of on his own because Sylas got incremental buffs and the champion itself was good even without Everfrost, I feel like. So I feel like Sylas was always kind of on his own outside of these three champions. So these four champions started to come into play and rise in priority. Alongside this, we saw Goredrinker get nerfed and Stridebreaker get a buff. So Nocturne mid was like a weird little thing that came into play. And then, as per usual, as we all remember, we saw the Sustained Kingdom come into play. And this is where we all wanted to shoot our brains out. This lasted a very long time. The Sustained-oriented meta lasted a very long time. This actually made mages incredibly hard to play. Everyone was complaining, myself included. I couldn't play any of my pool anymore. And this is, because Viego was very strong. The sustain between these two champions in lane. And obviously what they did to a lot of the AP mythics was a pain in the ass. And Sylas got, weeded out of the meta because Sylas couldn't be played into any of these champions. So these style of champions basically dominated the meta for the majority of that middle part of the season. Now on the back end of the season, people were still trying to figure out, well, surely, high wave clear oriented champions with mobility could surely counter these champs, or just the traditional melee counters like Ryze and LeBlanc. But Ryze and LeBlanc couldn't come in yet because the sustain was too insane from champions like Lee Sin and Viego. You just couldn't play them yet. Now, what happened inevitably, they started to nerf Viego, nerf Lee Sin. In the meantime, people were still trying to figure out the meta. Lucian was still obviously present because it had mobility and it could actually kind of shred a few of these champions. Akali with Riftmaker was one of the obvious choices to respond to these melees. And Gray's mid started to come into the meta because, again, it had the wave clear to deal with this constant push and it had the self-peel ability there. So this is a very weird transition phase before people realize that you could actually, play those traditional melee counters like LeBlanc and Ryze. Then inevitably, we saw the AP Mythic buffs, the cost reduction and things like that. And yes, alongside this, I forgot to mention, there was a weird phase where there was like a Moonstone meta where everyone started playing like Seraphine and Lulu and shit like that. But then obviously Moonstone got nerfed. And there's a weird Manamune meta where like all the mages were building Manamune. But I didn't even jump onto that bandwagon because I knew it was inevitably going to get nerfed. That was just a silly little thing. So finally, people realized, and between the buffs, True, LeBlanc, and Ryze incrementally across the season, as well as these champions responding well to the meta, LeBlanc and Ryze came through. And that was just, it was a combination of the gradual buffs and the meta fitting them perfectly. So it was kind of like an opportune circumstance, but it was inevitable anyway. It usually does come around to LeBlanc and Ryze mid through the second half of the season anyway. And then inevitably, we saw the rise of mages to counter these two champions. Syndra obviously being very good into these champs. Orianna and Cassio, obvious choices. This is kind of where we were in patch 11.17, dominating the meta. And then, obviously, as a response to these mages coming into the meta, we're seeing Twisted Fate make another resurgence, and then Aurelia. I feel like these two champions are very, very good in solo queue. A lot of people don't play Aurelia just because they're not good at her. And I also think Syndra is incredibly underrated. People just aren't good at her because she's so mechanically demanding. So you got to remember, this all stemmed back from this meta here, this weird transition phase, and people wanting to play LeBlanc and Ryze. People were trying to force it, but it just wasn't able to be done until the AP Mythic buff, plus the nerf to the sustain out of those laners. So right now, or not right now, we're in 11.18, but 11.17, this is kind of where we were. So we're in this nice little mage-oriented meta. And obviously in solo queue, the ever-present assassins, like I said at the beginning, the Kiana, the Zed, the Talon are still there. But this is, I would say, the strongest champions on the 11.17 patch. Now, moving on to patch 11.18 and onwards, I feel like the meta can go many different ways. Now, before we talk about the mid meta itself, we need to consider the jungle meta, because a lot of the time the mid meta is influenced by the jungle meta. If we see a lot of threat coming out of the jungle, and we see a lot of these assassins potentially go into the jungle and the meta becomes very skirmish oriented, it wouldn't surprise me if we see a slight shift away from these mages towards more of these like skirmish oriented mid laners, potentially like the Talon and the Silas and the Galio and things like that. But if we continue to go down that mage oriented meta, I think scenario one here, we're going to see potentially more Yasuo and Yone in solo queue. I think Kassadin is already on the edge and very strong in solo queue. I think Kassadin's actually in the strongest spot he has been for the entirety of the season. We even saw him played in competitive in the LCK. So that just shocked the hell out of me. So I think that Kassadin is a really, really good spot and responds well to especially a few of these immobile mages. And especially in solo queue. If it's working in competitive, it's a no-brainer that Kassadin is going to be pretty solid in solo queue. Yasuo usually comes back in the meta when we see Orianna and things like that in the early game, because you get so much early game pressure. And then Yone, look, a lot of people on the edge about Yone. I think Yone right now will probably make a resurgence, especially with a lot of these mages coming back into play. I do think that Yone predominantly gets countered by a lot of assassins and a lot of burst, in which if it is a predominantly mid-main control mage-oriented meta, we will see Yone rise in priority. Now, Fizz is on the edge. Some people view the nerfs or the changes to Fizz as a significant nerf. For me personally, I think that yes, the R damage reduction on Fizz is quite significant and will change his identity. I think you can make up for that by getting a lot more damage and a lot more things done with your pre-6, which I felt as though was the hardest part of Fizz and what made the champ kind of average in solo queue at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see which way that Fizz change shapes up. I personally think it's kind of like an even change. I don't think it's necessarily a buff or a nerf. I think it just requires change on the behalf of the Fizz player. You need to play a little bit more aggressive in the early game. Maybe not go Zhonya's first item anymore. Just go, instead of Lost Chapter into Zhonya's, just go straight Lunens, then into a second item Zhonya's. But that will be interesting to see. I think Talon is criminally underrated underrated at the moment. I think in a very good spot. I think a lot of people got turned off maybe playing the champ after the Prowler's nerfs or whatever. I don't know. All I know is that the Goredrinker setup with Conqueror is incredibly strong in solo queue. And a lot of people, especially in high-elo, underrate it. I think if we go down a more assassin, skirmish-oriented meta, we might even see Karma and Mel's to neutralize some of these champs and kind of slow down the pace of the game. Or we would just see the response of just straight Silas and Galio to neutralize or match some of that skirmish prowess. I think Silas, Galio, Fizz, Kassadin would be the four that kind of fit into both of these potential situations. Now, there are a few other niche picks that are on my radar. If we go down a more assassin-oriented meta, it wouldn't surprise me if we see a lot of Ari and Lissandra as a niche pick to counter some of these assassins. We already started to see a lot of Lissandra over the past patch or two as a response to LeBlanc, especially in Korea, so that doesn't surprise me whatsoever. I think these other champions on the right-hand side are Nivea, criminally underrated, good into both some assassins and immobile mages. Tristana, for some reason, fell out of the meta. Didn't even get a nerf. I think it just fell out of flavor. I don't know what the hell happened to Tristana, but I think at least in solo queue, it definitely has a place because it gets a boatload of early prio, decent early skirmishing, a lot of, solo kill threat, a solid champion in solo queue. Now, Akshan, I'm on the edge about. I think it's... Look, I'm really conflicted about it because sometimes, if you counter Akshan with, say, Syndra mid, Syndra completely obliterates the champion, it can neutralize it, and Akshan can't do anything. On the flip side, if you play Akshan in the right comp and you use it as a counter pick to something like a Fizz or a Kiana, if they take Exhaust, Secondary Resolve, it can be, an absolute pain in the ass for some of these lower range champions to deal with. So I'm on the edge. I think it definitely is a situational pick. Now, moving on, right? Does the meta even matter? I get this question all the time. People ask me about tier lists, what's strong in the meta and why. I've kind of gone through it today. And in a way, I'm going to kind of contradict myself with this, the first half of this video, basically going to say that, okay, yes, for the Master Plus community, it does matter, but really not to the extent that the High-elo community currently believes, okay? Now, what I've realized, guys, is that the players that consistently get high elo basically have the same champion pool with very minor additions for years, right? They don't just pick Flavor of the Month champion after Flavor of the Month champion and shift their pool every month or two. No. This is also why I believe tier lists are essentially useless for anyone below Grandmaster. You should always be focusing on champion mastery. Now, instead of me just saying it, and a lot of you guys say, no, but what about X? You try playing this champion in this meta, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to show you with stats. These are 3 of the highest elo mid laners in EU that aren't even 1-tricks or 2-tricks. Using 1-tricks and 2-tricks would be too easy for me, right? Because I could just pick the 1-tricks that are high elo and be like, just play one champion and play 1 or 2 champs and don't adapt to the meta. That's too easy, right? That's obvious to show that champ mastery is great. I'm actually going to show you 3 high elo. This is the rank 1 guy, rank 8, and rank 12 in EU. Now, here we go. This is their last 3 seasons of games. And this is sorted by 1 to 5, their most played, okay? Now, the blue here, the blue represents champions that they've played for multiple seasons. So this is the current rank 1 player right now. Look at this, 4 out of 5 champions he's played for multiple seasons. Season 11, look at the pool here. It's basically the same for the last 3 seasons. Tukuli, basically the same for the last 2 seasons. All 3 of these, the 3 top highest elo EU mid laners, basically have had the same pool for the past 3 seasons. The majority of their LP is coming from the champs they played for season in, season out. Look at this. He's played Akali for 3 seasons. This guy's played most of his champions for 3 seasons. Look at this one. Compare his season 11 with season 9. He's got Silas. He's got Akali. So Silas, Akali here. He's got Akali here again. Syndra for 2 seasons. LeBlanc for 2 seasons. Again, all of these ones. Syndra. With LeBlanc. Zoe. Rise. Right, like it's the same champions, guys. We get so caught up on trying to have the perfect champion pool. If you just focus on champion mastery and getting really, really good at a handful of champions, that's where the majority of your LP is going to go. So even for the High-elo community, for the Grandmaster Plus players, speaking from experience, I get most of my LP from like 3 champions, and then I might have like 2 niche picks that like kind of change meta to meta. But I still have my core 3, and that's where 90% of my LP is going to come from. Just look at the data, guys. Just look at the goddamn data. Now, I want to kind of go a little bit deeper on why this stuff really means very little, okay? Let's do an experiment. I want you guys to think about, a time during your league journey where you had the most success in solo queue. Could be a season ago, could be this season, just like a specific period of time. And this is where this wasn't just like a 2 days of solo queue. This was an extended period of time, whether it was a week or even like 5 days or whatever it might be, where you were just killing it. You were getting a lot of wins. You were feeling high confidence. I really want you to picture this moment during wherever this was during your league journey. Maybe you didn't even have it this season. Maybe you had it 2 seasons ago, 3 seasons ago. I want you to really think back on this moment. Now, when you think back to this moment, I want you to get very specific. Imagine the feeling you had while you were playing this champion. And I'm assuming you would have felt, some of these things, right? You would have felt relaxed, poised, controlled. You weren't really worrying about scaling. You didn't really feel like you had to rush at all. You felt really cool, calm, collected. You feel like you knew what you had to do in that game and why. The game felt like it was played around you, and your impact felt very high. Now, this specific event can actually come about very luckily and very opportunistically. You can just stumble into this specific situation, or it can actually be replicated quite easily. So I want to talk about this. In League, what makes the game so hard is that the games are just so unbelievably chaotic. There are, literally thousands of potential decisions to make in each and every game. Do I reset now or on that wave or in the wave after that or on this amount of gold or that amount of gold, or should I roam here? Should I not roam? How do I know should I roam or not? Is this play even going to make me winning or losing? Do I even win this matchup and lose this matchup? Do I play for scale? Do I not play for scale? There's so many things to potentially think about or even play out that one given matchup. Now, if you actually think back to the times where you popped off, no, not just that one time, not that one time where you played well, that extended duration, you knew what you wanted to happen in that game and why. All right, now you may ask, where does this all come from? Now, this is something I've really been using in my coaching. At the end of this video, I'm actually going to show you a coaching session where I use this actual model here. And I'll talk about this for a second. So bear with me. I've got a little pyramid here. And at the bottom, we have champion mastery, the crux. This is everything. This is everything to climbing League of Legends. Everything starts here with champion mastery. You will not climb in the long term without champion mastery. So champ mastery number 1. And champion mastery obviously, comes with time. You've got to play a lot of the champion, think a lot about the champion. You know its spikes, why it's strong when it is, what sort of fights it likes. You know everything about that champion, okay? Now, once we've got this champion mastery down pat, it will take some time, but it's relatively easy to develop. We're going to get very good at assessing our role within a game. Right, so we get into a game, and the analogy I like to use for this, guys, is imagine you're like working at McDonald's, and you're at the back, and for those of you who've worked in fast food, there might be like multiple people on the line where like one person here like puts the buns in the machine, and then you've got like another person who puts like the condiments on the burger, and then you've got like another dude that like puts the patty in, then it gets sent off. Now, all these 3 people want the same result at the end of the day, right? They want to get that burger out to the customer, right? In solo queue, everyone on your team wants to win the game or kill the Nexus, or at least I hope so. But in solo queue, each of you fill a different role, just like you would on this little burger line here. Each person has their job, and they fill a different specific duty within that specific event. Now, in League, we have different comps every single time, right? So your role and your champ, based off your champion, the champs in the game, and the game state, your role is going to differ like game to game. Now, I'm going to give you a few examples here, guys. As Galio, for example, it's very easy to assess your role in a given game, right? Especially when you pair it with like a Camille, and Camille gets 1 or 2 kills in the game. Therefore, I'm Galio, I'm a facilitator. I want to create space and CC and be that utility bot for my Fed champion on my team. And ideally, that Camille that you paired it with. Boom, I press R, I create space, I shove and move. So therefore, if my role is very clear and I know who my win con is, I know what my role is in that game, everything and all of my decisions are going to revolve around this role assessment. So I'm going to know. I'm going to put my vision on that top side. I'm going to hover out of vision on that top side. I'm going to threaten my ult on that top side. I'm going to shove and move and hover that top side. Everything revolves around my role assessment. It all stems from my role assessment. Now, some games in League of Legends are going to be really hard to identify your role. Sometimes it's going to be really easy due to how clear your champ's identity is, or you have maybe like this really obvious secondary win condition. But anyway, we'll come back to this in a second. So we've got our champ mastery, which allows us to identify our role each and every game. Now, once we're able to identify our role, we can then begin to work on our strategy. Now, if you remember, going back here a little bit, going back to these questions, do I reset here or do I reset later? Should I roam or should I not roam? Is going even winning or is going even losing? How do I know what to do? Well, this is all the strategy, right? And you know how you hear people talk about the matchup should go like this, and here you get a coach, and the coach will say you shouldn't roam here, you should have just reset, or instead of resetting, you should have gone top here, or instead of doing this, you should have done that. And a lot of the time, the client is like, well, how the hell is this coach pulling this information? Where are they getting it from? They're just pulling it out of their ass. How do they know? And then they'll say, yeah, I'm high-elo, just trust me, I know what to do. But it doesn't help, right? So in my coaching, I try to bring it back to, no, I'll share with them why I come to this conclusion. And it always ties back, whether or not that high-low coach or whatever understands what's actually happening. What the reason why they're saying those things is because they know this decision brings them closer to killing the Nexus and works with coherence to your role within that game. Okay. Now, strategy, classic strategy examples of, you might ask, well, what's an example of a classic strategy that is coherent with your role in a game? Well, if you think about a classic Echo, let's talk about an Echo one. And these are 4 champions that are very stock standard strategies that that have cookie cutter strategies that work very well for your role, give you a very clear role. So Echo, a common strategy right now with Echo, you're going to start with a Dark Seal or a Doran's. You're going to go back for a Dark Seal or a Doran's, and your goal is to essentially get to level 7, get that as much AP as possible, get that Blasphemon, get that Alternator, whatever you want to get, and turn into that shove and move bot, that pressure bot, 2 Qs that get the wave, and then you're going to influence the map. You're going to play for push and move and create man advantage, because your role, and then most of the people, the way they interpret Echo's role is kind of like a shove and move bot. You're a skirmisher. You're going to get to as many fights as possible. You don't really want to be stuck in the isolated 1v1. Okay, some other champions here. There's stock standard strategies with Rise where you just want to minimize the early lane, get to your lost chapter. So therefore, a lot of your early lanes, you're just going to be shoving, burning through all of your mana and your pots, going back for an early tier or whatever you want to go back for, constantly shoving and moving or shoving and resetting, tempo reset, get to your lost chapter, in which you can play that pressure game and then play that shove and move strategy, which works perfectly with your role, which works perfectly with your champ's identity, is coherent with that champion mastery. Okay. Now, to add a little bit of color to this, you might be a little bit confused here. Let's go a little bit deeper. One of the most difficult things to improving in the game is that there are so many mistakes, right? You make a trillion mistakes throughout a game, right? You've got things like this. These are just a handful of potential mistakes. You've got failing a roam and losing six creeps mid. You've got having to blow flash to a gank, missing a tempo reset opportunity and maybe overstaying in the lane, or missing an opportunity to take a rift. Now, in League, because we make all these mistakes, how do you know where to put your attention? How do I know how much value to put onto this mistake? Because we all make mistakes, but how do I know what's important and what's not important, or what contributes a lot to the game and what doesn't contribute that much to a game? So this is where, tying back to role assessment, champ mastery, and strategy, okay, let's take an Orianna. If I'm playing Orianna and I blow flash to a gank, so I'm playing Ori versus Akali, and I blow flash to a gank as Ori into Akali, this can be literally game losing. Because if you think about how to win the game as Orianna and versus Akali, tying it back to that role assessment, well, my role in the game as Ori into Akali is to isolate the lane, small wins, keep the Akali pinned, prevent her from roaming, and then scale, get to my items, and then play those front-to-back team fights. I don't want to really I don't want 2v2s. I don't want scrappy little 3v3s. I don't want to allow her to roam or anything like that. So me blowing flash will mean I can't maybe contest as much. I'm under a lot more kill threat. She can basically just kill me at level 6 if she flashes onto me or whatever, and I can just die. Therefore, I can't fulfill my role. And if I can't fulfill my role, I'm useless. I don't have an identity anymore. So then I'll have to try and shift my identity, but then it can get really, really hard. So this mistake here, on a scale of 0 to 100, 100 being game losing and 0 being not impacting the game whatsoever, could be a solid 95. Whereas missing an opportunity to take Rift, it might not be that big of a problem for Orianna and Takali. Might even only be worth 20. It might be 20 on a scale of 0 to 100. Now let's shift the perspective. Let's maybe talk about Qiyana for a second. Well, having to blow flash to a gank as Qiyana might not really mean as much. I mean, potentially it might. Maybe you're very flash oriented that game and everyone has a lot of gap closing you, which you really need flash. Other games, not so much. Maybe you're not really under much gank threat anyway. There's like an Olaf jungle or something, and he can't really kill you because you have grass Qs, so it doesn't really mean a big deal. So maybe this is only a 30. So notice, you get what I'm talking about here, guys, where by knowing what your role is in a game and therefore your strategy, you can then understand the value or the non-value of a mistake. And that's what's going to really understand how to calibrate your mind to know where to direct attention. All right, so look, when it comes to, and this will make more sense when I show the example in the coaching session, when it comes to any decision in the game, any key pivotal moment, don't just try and like figure it out like with no you need some form of reference point to know why that mistake or why that decision is good or bad or how to come to that conclusion. Now I'm going to give you one last little thing before we continue on in this video. I've thought back to the clients that I've worked with that have had the best results. And I'm working with a guy from, one of the guys I'm working with in the Mid Lane Academy is from OS, and he's climbed from Diamond 3, I think, to Grandmaster. And he did it, essentially, knowing or creating a reference point with his Echo. So before, he was pretty good with Echo, and we review his games with Echo, and he knew how to take good trades, his mechanics were okay, and, fundamentals were okay, but he would just kind of slowly lose games or make very silly mistakes. Then what happened, he said to me, Curtis, I just realized, like, I don't have any reference point to make decisions in the game. I don't know why I should shove or when I should restart or anything like that. So what he did, he basically said, all right, I'm going to do this every game. I'm going to base on like 400 gold, and then I'm going to try and get to either 1050 or 850 for my Blasting Wand or Alternator. And my goal is I don't really want to interact with the enemy laner at all. I just want to get to level 7, and I just want to play for shove and move. I don't want to interact with my laner. And I just want to get to my rocket belt as fast as possible. So we had this really clear strategy that tied directly to his role, and having this reference point, like something to aim for in the game, made the entire game much easier for him. So because he was able to say no to certain things, say yes to certain things, because he would then realize, okay, if I say yes to this play and I compensate, he knew directly how it would influence his strategy. But if you're just reacting to games, you don't know what the hell you're doing, or you don't know what your role is in the game, then how do you know whether it's worth it to go for that roam or not? Again, tying back to the value of mistakes, you don't know the value or non-value of any of the decisions you're making in the game. Okay, so the TLDR, guys, Champ Mastery is number 1. This is the foundation that allows you to develop your role assessment and your strategy skill set. So what I'll leave you with at the end of this video, guys, is a bit of a coaching clip I've done. It's a short little section of a coaching session I did in the Mid Lane Academy. I think it will kind of tie together what I've really been trying to articulate here. Thanks for listening. I know it's a bit of a mindfuck. It's kind of hard to like understand, but once it clicks, it will really give you direction moving forward into your games and especially in your reviews. Cheers, guys, and good luck in your solo queue. Number 1, the most important thing is Champ Mastery. It's a given. The reason Champ Mastery is important is that so that we are actually able to identify our role in a game. And our role in a game is going to differ based off the comp that we're in, based off what we believe to be the win con. So it's our role in relation to the win con. Based off our role in the game, we can then now create strategy, right? And this strategy, this is going to influence, obviously, lane pace, the types of trades we're going to take, where we want to hold the wave. This is going to allow us to determine the value of a roam. Should we play for roam or the 1v1? So this is like the specifics or the how. This is the how to fulfill this role, okay? Does this make sense so far?
Yeah, definitely.
Right, lovely. So in a game like this, we can look at a lot of mistakes from, a micro individual level, which comes down to matchup understanding, and that's fine. And that somewhere fits down to this is the bottom of this little pyramid type flowchart thing. So this happens, you're limit testing, you try to learn the matchup, whatever. We make a little bit of a blunder. And at this point, the win con and your role in the game, at least from a win con perspective, you're definitely not going to be a win con this game. Or not the main win con. You might be a win con, a secondary one or a third one, whatever, but you're not going to be the win con because now because you miss a lot of farm after this death, you're going to be significantly behind in XP. You do terribly into Fiora. You don't do that well into Zed. Or you do okay, but not really anymore. And you don't do that well into Caitlyn. There's not many good ults either. So it's not like a great Silas game, especially when you're not ahead. So at this point, from a role perspective, it's either the win con is either probably going to be the Renekton, unless Renekton magically starts winning the matchup, or it's going to be the Jhin Karma bot lane. I don't think Jarvan can be a win con either into a comp like this. Or maybe he can be a secondary win con. So right now, my thought process in this game is, okay, I need to slow this game down in order to create, or at least clear up in my mind what the win con is. Now, if you believed this game that you were still the win con for whatever reason, based off your champ mastery understanding or what you believe to be happening in the side lanes, then what would we suggest? Well, we would suggest that you would try and be constantly trying to get ahead in the 1v1, kill this guy, ask for ganks, whatever reason. If you believed it was your bot lane, well, your job might be to simply neutralize the Zed, won't it? Prevent the Zed from roaming. Because you want your bot lane to just win the isolated 2v2 or continue to win the game, or win their lane. So you come out, we have a little bit of tempo, we come back, and we know at this point that we definitely don't beat the Zed. We know that he's going to have Dirk. It's going to be a little bit tricky. So what happens? Lilia shows top, bot lane seems to be taking good trades in the 2v2, and Jarvan decides to go for the dragon. Now, if we think about our role in this game, tying it back to our role in this game, we know that we aren't the win con. So bot lane takes some excellent trades in the 2v2, Jarvan's doing the dragon. Now, if we pause it right here, it's obvious that this guy is cross-mapping straight onto bot side, isn't she? They're looking to stop the dragon, aren't they?
Yeah.
Like, you can see this. Now, in this situation, you have a choice to make, right? Because you're thinking to yourself, fuck, well, like, they're on dragon. We know, and they're probably going to head to dragon. Is a fight likely going to happen? Should I ditch this wave and go down -6? Or should I stay? Now, notice how if you don't have a reference point to make this decision, it's impossible for you to make the decision. If you don't know, like, what is this in reference to? You got to have a reference point to make this decision. So, tying it back to what our win con is, or what we perceive to be our role in this game, you are not the carry. So, therefore, in this game, given the importance of Jarvan being 2-0 and being a potential win con, bot lane being another potential win con, I am more than happy to go down -6 to be there for this fight and prevent them from dying, because otherwise the game will explode. Does that make sense? So now notice how I'm deducing based off the series of events throughout the game. I'm always constantly updating and getting clarity on what the game state is, therefore what my role fits, how my role is in that game. Now, notice how this might be a completely different ball game. If you're really fed and there's a lot of good ults and you're the main carry, you might not want to go down -6, and maybe this guy's 0-1, it doesn't fucking matter. But that's a different game state. But here, you don't walk down, you play for the wave, they collapse, they take a 3v3 or 4v4, and then they die. The Jhin dies, Jarvan dies, Caitlyn gets a shutdown. The game's exploded now. The game's really, really hard to win from this point. You see how that works?